Greetings. This is the second recipe for the SCA Cooking Challenge. It is an herb tart that comes from the 1393 manuscript Le Ménagier de Paris, called in English the Goodman of Paris. This recipe is for a tart that contains a variety of fresh greens with cheese and eggs, much like a quiche. To make a tart, take 4 handfuls of beets, 2 handfuls of parsley, a handful of chervil, a sprig of fennel, and 2 handfuls of spinach, and pick them over and wash them in cold water, then cut them up very small. Then bray with 2 sorts of cheese, to wit, a hard and a medium, and then add eggs thereto, yolks and whites, and braid them in with the cheese. Then put the herbs into the mortar and bray all together, and also put therein some fine powder. Or instead of this, have ready brayed in the mortar 2 heads of ginger, and onto this bray your cheese, eggs, and herbs. And then cast old cheese scraped or grated onto the herbs, and take it to the oven, and then have your tart made and eat it hot. For my recipe, I used beet greens, parsley. I did not find any chervil locally, which is an herb like parsley but a little milder in flavor, so I skipped adding that. I used a stalk of fennel, which has a mild licorice flavor, and spinach leaves. I followed the recipe for the handfuls of each, and cut them up very small. This yielded about 6 cups of herbs, which turned out to be enough for about 3 tarts, using 2 cups of herbs in each tart. But I only made 2 tarts. For the hard cheese, I used Gruyere cheese, which is commonly used for quiches, and Swiss cheese for the medium cheese, 8 ounces of each. When chopped up, each of these cheeses makes about 2 cups. The cheeses were mixed together, and I used 2 cups of cheese for each tart. 4 eggs were added to each of the 2 cups of cheese and then thoroughly mixed. 2 cups of the chopped herbs were mixed in with the eggs and cheese for each tart. So that's a total of 4 cups per tart. And then a teaspoon of fine powder spices was added for each tart. There are many variations for the spice mixes used in the Middle Ages, but here is the mix I used for fine powder. 3 tablespoons of ground ginger, 2 tablespoons of sugar, 1 1/2 tablespoons of cinnamon, 1 teaspoon of cloves, and I used 1 teaspoon of allspice instead of grains of paradise. The recipe mentions that if you don't have any fine powder, just grind up some ginger and use that instead. Once this is mixed in with the cheese and herbs, it is ready to put into the tart crust. In the recipe, it states, take it to the oven and then have your tart made. The tart pastry is not explained in the recipe, as cooks would know how to make a pastry. I used a French recipe for short paste for my crust. For each tart crust, I used 1 cup of white flour, then mixed in 1/8 teaspoon of salt, 1/3 cup of cold water, and 2 ounces of softened butter. This was blended into a dough and then rolled into a ball and left for a few hours at room temperature. After that, it was rolled out into a circle large enough to fill a 9-inch pie dish. The pie dish was greased using butter, and the crust was placed inside, extending up the side edge of the dish. The crust is pierced many times on the bottom with a knife tip to let air out so the dough doesn't rise when baked. I placed another dish inside of the crust to weight it down and keep it from rising. Bake the crust for 25 minutes at 375 degrees Fahrenheit. This is called blind baking when the crust is baked before filling it. After taking the crust out of the oven, fill the crust with chips of herb and cheese mix. The recipe states to cast old cheese scraped or grated onto the herbs. So I placed a little more cheese on the top to make a cheesy upper layer. I also sprinkled a little grated Parmesan cheese on top, then decorated it with a few sprigs of parsley. Bake the tart in the oven at 375 degrees for 30 minutes. It will be a little bubbly and starting to brown when removed from the oven. Let it cool for a while. Then it can be cut with a knife and served on a plate. It will be firm and tasty. I thought the herb flavors would be more overpowering in this tart, but their flavor was very subtle, with the biggest flavor from the cheese, followed by the fine powder spices. It is a flavor that is not frequently encountered in modern American cooking, and I have to say that the medieval people who were able to eat this dish ate very well indeed.
There's nothing that whets the appetite for a good meal than coming in from battle. And today we have a good meal of a herb tart. I'm Nick Saint-Erne, or in Atenvilt Kingdom, I'm known as Nicholas de Navarre. And today I've made a herb tart. Let's give it a try. This is a great tart.